Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Pastor Guns. Welcome to the Pastors Forum. This is a lively and frank discussion about ministry in the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. My name is Jeffrey Guns. I'm the senior pastor of Second Calvary Baptist Church in Norfolk, Virginia. And tonight, as always, I'm joined by Dr. Sheridan Nelson,
Good evening.
pastor at Senior Baptist Church, also in Norfolk. And normally we would be joined by Bishop John Guns, who is the senior pastor of St. Paul Church in Jacksonville, Florida. But he's not here with us at the time. He may join us. He's away on a family trip, and so he may join us. And so we want to just thank you for joining with us. We were not able to be with you last week. This evening, we're going to continue to have conversation about ministry and this COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 era. It just seems like we're always getting good news and bad news. Today, we got more good news about a second vaccine that's going to be coming out. And what I like about it, Dr. Nelson, it says it is 100% effective for those who are 65 and older. So I'm really excited about that. And I know that'll be good news to the members of your family and to the congregation. And I know that like all of you all, we're tired of the pandemic. Tired, just worn out with this thing, worn out with the isolation, the separation, and all of the challenges that we've had to overcome with this global pandemic. We're getting close, and we really need our members and communities to stay encouraged. The election is over. The pandemic is coming to an end probably in the next 9 to 12 months. So the end is coming. And so we're glad that you continue to stay with us. Dr. Nelson, would you go ahead and lead us in prayer?
Absolutely. Eternal God, we are so grateful for just another day, another week that you have given us. And as we come to the close of this day and we spend this time together, we ask, Holy Spirit, that you would just be our guide, lead us, and bless all who will share, and even those who will view later, that may they be empowered and informed and enlightened by our time together in the conversations for tonight. And we ask your presence now as you guide us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. This is a pragmatic discussion about ministry. And we've been talking about over the last several weeks about mistakes that pastors and church leaders have made dealing with the COVID-19 novel coronavirus. We've talked about the consequences that have come to churches in terms of this virus. And tonight we want to kind of continue that, and we want to see if we can't bring some closure to this particular discussion, because in the future we really would like to have some other conversations with you about church and ministry, maybe some things about the scriptures, some practical things that'll be helpful to you in your ministry and in your Christian life. And so this evening we're going to just take up that third pillar of this discussion and talk about opportunities that churches may have going forward, and then just some things that you and I need to think about. So, Dr. Nelson, the pandemic is far from over. We may very well be just at the halfway point of return to normal. What are some things that have happened over the past 10 months that you wish you could have foreseen?
Well, definitely one in terms of anticipating the longevity of the pandemic. I think initially all of us, in a lot of ways, anticipated that this was going to be, over a shorter period of time. But now, almost 10 months in, I wish I would have had more foresight into how long we would have been dealing with the closure of our churches and many of our institutions, and just the overall disruption of the normalcy of our lives, which, definitely wish we could have had some forethought, and foresight rather into that matter.
Yeah, I guess and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Just in hindsight, just going back to January, and
Yeah.
about a year ago, we were all probably filled with optimism, excitement, looking forward to the new year, coming up on the second decade of the 21st century. A lot of great positive things will happen. And then 3 months into the new year, we are really shut down.
Exactly.
No one could have foreseen that this was going to come. And I think that it really, really kind of points up, and we'll talk a little bit about some of this a little later on when we talk about organizational resilience. It really kind of points out the strengths and the weaknesses in our ministries. That when you're hit with a crisis, what do you do? And then
Right.
how do you then begin to turn around? And when you think about it, there's still churches today trying to figure this thing out.
Exactly.
Almost 10 months into
To it.
the pandemic. And so when you think about this, what do you see as your biggest challenge going forward? Dr. Nelson. Looks like Dr. Nelson is frozen. So just thinking about the our biggest challenges going forward, in all ministries, all of us are going to have some huge challenges going forward. I think that probably one of the biggest challenges that I see that we're going to be facing is just restarting. Just restarting and helping people to become comfortable with coming back. And then not only just restarting, but building and strengthening the fabric and the fiber of the congregation, because in many ways, people have been away from church. And for some people, it's going to be almost a year and a half. And for some people, it may be 2 years. So reacclimating and reconstituting the congregation is really going to be, I think, a major challenge. Now, I know, we say, well, we've been meeting on Zoom, we've been doing things, and we've been connected, but in many ways, we've been separate, and we've been apart from one another. So, Dr. Nelson, I was just making some comments about what do you see as your biggest challenge going forward? And I kind of remarked that I think that one of the biggest challenges that I see for me is just reconstituting the congregation, just bringing the congregation back together again. And I'm not sure that people really are prepared for what that's going to look like, especially when you've been out of church for a year. For some people, it may be a year and a half.
Right.
What do you see?
As we continue with the pandemic, I see two of the biggest challenges in terms of one, connectivity. How are we going to keep people connected, and also engagement? I think that is a challenge. The longer we are out, and the longer this progresses, how are we going to keep people engaged? Just beyond, Sunday morning viewership on whatever platforms they're viewing, how are we going to keep people engaged and discipling and overall connected and engaged to the overall life of being a Christian, first of all and foremost, and also engaged in the work and ministry of the church?
Yeah, I guess you got a good point there. Stimulating excitement.
Yeah.
Getting people excited about what it is that we are doing and how we keeping these ministries connected, engaged, excited, keeping people stimulated, bringing them back together, and hoping that in the short term, that while we work at getting reacquainted, the Holy Spirit is going to do his work in terms of reconnecting the hearts, the minds, and the spirits of people. Let's talk about organizational resilience. I was looking at something from a company, BIS Corporation, an organization that specializes in helping corporations and organizations develop practices and processes that enable them to thrive. And, organizational resilience is probably not something that we talk about in terms of congregations, but let me just kind of give you their definition of organizational resilience. And they say that organizational resilience is the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruption in order to survive and prosper. It reaches beyond risk management towards a more holistic view of business health and success. And so they go on to say that a resilient organization is one that not merely survives over the long term, but also flourishes passing the test of time. So let's just kind of unpack this in terms of how we think about our churches and our ministries. And as I thought about that, as I read that, I started to just kind of think, is Second Calvary a resilient organization? And so they say that it's the ability of an organization to anticipate.
Right.
To anticipate. So what are you anticipating going forward?
Yeah, I'm anticipating a re-envisioned church that has renewed passion and motivation for reaching people. And I think one of the ways for us as we begin to think about this is looking at how we can begin to repurpose our facilities and buildings. And so how can we begin to repurpose our facilities where we have been so inwardly focused over the years that now I think one of the exciting things that this time brings for us is to now recommit ourselves to being outwardly focused. And with that, for us and me, it becomes having the conversations of how we can begin to repurpose, facilities for community empowerment.
Okay. I'm when I think about going forward, I've been thinking about this over the last few days. What I anticipate is a slow return to normal. That's the first thing I'm anticipating, that this return is going to be slow, because in reality, it's going to take some time for pastors to readjust and to reorient themselves from preaching in large
churches.
Or in your living room or from your dining room, where you are basically an audience of one, to trying to bring people together. So I'm anticipating a real slow return to normal, and then I'm also anticipating that there's going to be some disappointment on the part of some of the members. And when I say that, what I mean is what they view on their televisions and on their screens is a production.
Right.
It's a production. It's worship that is put together. It's spliced together. There's no live singing, or there very little live singing, and so it is a production uh, that is untypical of what a typical worship service would be. So I'm anticipating that there might be some disappointment. I'm also anticipating the need to rebuild community,
Hmm.
and I think
Hmm.
that you were talking about that, about engagement, uh,
Hmm.
and rebuilding community, because when people have been separated for so long,
Right.
um, already even before the pandemic, people, most of our members had relatively superficial relationships with one another,
Exactly.
and so now, they don't even know each other,
Right. Right.
other than what they've seen on the screens, and so this really rather slow return to community, building community, strengthening the leaders, and really kind of readjusting my own way of thinking and acting around them, because for months I've not been around the
The
member.
people. Exactly. Exactly. So the
So
anxiety level. Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna take a little. It's gonna take all of us to some time to readjust
Just to that. Hmm.
to normal. So they talk about these resilient organizations as being able to respond and then to adapt to
Hmm.
incremental change and sudden disruptions. Um, just talk a little bit about how you were able to lead Abyssinia to this adaptation.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and then if you can just say something maybe to some pastors who may be or church leaders who may be trying to figure out, how do we adapt to this changing context.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who were to ask you that?
I think, Doc, initially the adaptation was all about understanding if we didn't adapt, our survival was going to be at stake. So initially, while we were a church that had already embraced, some, technology, and we're already streaming and doing things, using, the technology that was at our disposal, we hadn't pushed the throttle, or pushed the gas all the way to the floor in some regards. And so we really didn't have any online classes and things of that nature that we were offering. Most of that was still in person. So as we understood that if we didn't adapt full-heartedly over the course of this pandemic, that ultimately our survival would be at stake. So as we began to adapt, it really helped to advance us in some areas that we were really kind of moving at turtle speed in terms of getting up to speed in some regards with some of these other platforms and embracing some of the other technology that was available to us. So in some regard, as we adapted, it also helped to advance. And so then what the beauty of it and the power of the Holy Spirit and God at work is, the more we begin to adapt and to migrate over to these digital platforms and other things that were available, it now allowed us to begin to advance. So now we saw the growth, we saw greater participation in some regards that we hadn't seen before, as we began to adapt to these new ways, new technology, new platforms that was available to us. So I would say, to a pastor that is listening and sharing with us tonight, or some church leader, that this is the time that you're going to have to lean in. You're going to have to lean in, fully get engaged, fully embrace, because this is the new normal. And if you're going to be a ministry and church that is going to thrive, not just survive, coming out of this, and as we continue in this, you are going to have to make the investments necessary, to for your church ministry to embrace the technology and the use of technology, streaming services, online courses. I know you said something about that in the weeks to pass, online Christian education. All of these offerings now have to become a part of the lifeblood of your ministry if you're going to be relevant going forward.
Wow, that is so true. And so when I think about that, when I think about the whole idea of responding and adapting to the incremental changes that came about, and I've mentioned this before, that it required some time to make that adjustment, and so
Mhm.
um, we had to adapt our ministry. Everything about the ministry as we
Knew it. Yeah.
had to
Hmm.
change, and so um, how do you do an angel tree when you're used to gathering? How do
Hmm.
you do a homeless project? How do you do and you mentioned about Christian education and your teaching ministry. How do you
Hmm.
do all of these things, your leadership training and everything else that you're doing? And so you have to adapt, and you have to
Right.
adapt relatively quickly. So we had to adapt our missions focus. How do we continue to do missions? You've mentioned about facilities and the whole
Hmm.
thing of repurposing facilities. And so we've been making investments in touchless this and touchless that, and taking a look at light switches that come on when people, lights that come on when people enter rooms. So
Hmm.
no touching of the light switches, and toilets that flush on their own. I know that just sounds, but toilets that flush on their own. Just a whole range of things
Exactly.
that we probably would have no, we would have never done uh, had it
Right.
not been for the pandemic. And so, just thinking about the facilities and then how we're going to use the facilities going forward.
After. Yeah. Yeah.
Adjusting our calendar schedule, and just a whole range of things. And I must admit, I've got some people who have been very, very creative uh,
Hmm.
in terms of being able to adjust and adapt. And I guess that kind of flows from the leadership,
Right. Right.
that happens. So they say, and they mention that a resilient organization um, is able to overcome these things so that it moves from surviving to prospering.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked a little bit about that. That we want our churches to prosper. We want the
Right.
ministry to prosper. You want to prosper. I want to prosper. And so we
Exactly.
want things to be, um, we want the ministry to survive over the long term. I was talking to somebody the other day who mentioned to me about congregations that they knew about,
Hmm.
years ago that they grew up with that are no longer in existence.
Hmm.
Smaller congregations that just simply went out of business. Um, and so when you think about the ministry at Abyssinia, what has been the most resilient component of the ministry at Abyssinia?
You know, our commitment to serve people and to help people um, has been a resilient and resounding part of our church and our ministry. Is at the end of the day, um, we haven't made excuses. We just made adjustments, and we have found ways to continue to serve and continue to help people and be the hands and feet of Jesus in our communities. And
Mhm.
so our missions ministry is thriving, our outreach has thrived, and our overall commitment to advancing, the gospel, even in this context, as we're trying to figure things out ourselves, we have not wavered in those two things: our overall commitment to reach people and our overall commitment to spread the gospel.
I think that that's very important, and I'd like for you to. I want to make a comment, and I want you to hold that thought because, and you may want to write this down. You
Okay.
know,
Okay.
how did you get to that point? I mean,
Mhm.
where the pandemic's going on, you're thriving, and you're continuing to move forward. Um, that's not just something that happens overnight. Uh,
Sure.
you didn't just get to the pandemic and all of a sudden you say, "Wow, this is what we need to do."
Right.
How did you
Right.
get to that point?
Well, I think that, as I look over the years, Abyssina, just where we're in the midst of celebrating our church anniversary right now. We are 52, 53 years in. Oh
Mhm.
Lord, it just slipped me. But when I look over the span of our ministry, that has been a that has been constant, and it has been a constant mission. It has been a part of a constant vision of our church, and it has been echoed over the years and down through each generation and through the decades, in terms of our commitment to reach people for Jesus Christ and our commitment to our community and to serve. And so it's a part of the bloodline. It's a part of our DNA, is who we are. And regardless of the circumstances and the context, we have continued to find ways to do that and to be that.
Wow, that's really critical. When I think about Second Calvary, I think of Second Calvary as our mission is we're a community church with a global vision. We are a traditional church with a contemporary flavor.
Mhm.
We are you know, and I know most people may find this hard to believe, but we are a traditional denominational Baptist church.
Mhm.
Bar none. I mean, when you look at traditional Baptist churches, Second Calvary is a traditional denominational Baptist church. But the difference is we have a contemporary flavor about us.
Mhm.
We've never left our denominational roots, and we continue to thrive within that. But the key to our resilience has been our leaders and
Mhm.
our people. The members of Second Calvary and the leaders have really stepped up and continued to advance the ministry forward. And I think that that's what you're talking about,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
talking about how that ministry has been able to continue to thrive. And that didn't just happen. It happens
Right.
because you have people.
Right.
You got to
Right.
have people. You got to
Right.
have people who are engaged. You got to have people who are excited about the
And
ministry.
committed. And
You have
commit.
to have
Yeah. And
people who are
committed.
committed
Mhm.
to serving, and you got to have people who are willing to follow and to buy in and invest themselves in what they believe the Lord is leading you to do as the pastor of the church. And so, and I just say to anybody who's listening that if you look at Abyssinia, you look at Second Calvary, you look at any congregation that's really on the cusp of doing things. You look at St. Paul's, you look at a Gethsemane, you look at any of these churches
Mhm.
that are really about the business of ministry. It all starts with the people.
Right.
You can have a program, you can have a building, but if you don't have people, you got to have people. And we've got great people. We've got tremendous leaders. That I can just simply say, "Hey, we need to do this, this, and this," and then they're on it.
Right.
They're going to make it happen. And
Right.
so that's all about training. It's about leadership engagement. It's about building confidence and trust in the people around you, and
Mhm.
then as a pastor, it's about being the leader.
Right.
Yeah, it's about being the leader.
Yeah.
My dad had taught me that when it comes to being the pastor, there can only be one pastor in the room.
Only one.
Yeah,
Only one.
yeah. There can't be a bunch of people in the room who are superseding who your role as the pastor of the church.
Right.
There can only be one pastor in the room. You can have a lot of advisors
Right.
and a lot of
Right.
people who are helping, but there's only one pastor in the room.
Right.
And so in order to get, what have you been doing over the years to strengthen your members, so that when this pandemic hit, you were ready to go?
I think constant vision casting, talking about the future, talking about how we are going to continue to advance, not being stagnant and comfortable with where you are, but always looking to continue to grow, to continue to continue to advance. And I think here's the question for persons right now, as we're here at the end of the year, and I know many are anticipating on going back, but I think the question that leaders and pastors and leaders must begin to ask right now, as we evaluate, come to the close of another year, is how are we going to move our church forward in the new year?
Wow.
How are we going to move forward? In the midst of this pandemic, how are we going to move forward as a church? And I think the more you begin to pray about that, have conversations around that, it begins to create and give you a vision for where your ministry has the potential to head in the upcoming year. But I think that's the question: how are we going to move the church forward? Not when are we going back, but how are we going to move forward?
How are we going to move forward? That is a very important question in terms of moving forward. So, what are some strategies or steps that pastors and leaders can take now to begin building organizational resilience?
I think developing leaders, developing emerging leaders, creating a system in your church where you are developing leaders. I think we talked about this in some previous episodes. What is your system on developing potential talent and new talent in your church to create a climate and culture where you are constantly engaging different generations to get creativity, input, buy-in, across the generational, gaps within your church. So I think creating a system for that becomes really healthy and key for the future growth and the potential, of your church. And looking at, creating some strategic plan. I know right now for many of us, it may be just some short-term plan because there's so much uncertainty about the future. But what does the first and second quarter of the new year look like? What are some of the strategic steps in football terms? How are we going to advance the ball? What does a win look like for us in this season? I think those are some of the questions we, have to be entertaining and having conversation and setting benchmarks behind, and not just becoming idle and dormant over the course of this pandemic.
Wow, I think you're right. Developing, and I would say this to every pastor who is listening and to every church leader. The time to get ready for a crisis is when everything is well, when there's peace in the camp, when you have the leisure and the latitude to train your leaders, to develop your systems, your routines, and the things that you have going on, where you can really focus on the hearts, the minds, the vision, the forward direction that you're trying to lead a congregation in. So training leaders, I think, and that's one of the things. I wrote my dissertation, my doctoral thesis on training small group leaders. Yeah. And over the nearly 38 years that I've been at Second Calvary, that's been one of the things that we have done and continue to do even today. Training leaders, developing leaders training leaders on every aspect of ministry that you need, and working with them to move the ministry forward, and then giving them the commensurate responsibility and authority to carry out the vision and the plans that God has given to you. Let's shift one more time and just talk about the role of technology in the ministry. What would you say to someone about the future of technology in the church?
I think the future of technology is going to be the way we advance the kingdom and advance the gospel. It is going to be through our use and embracing of technology. It is, as I said in the previous episode that we shared, it is the new Roman road. It is the new Romans road. If it had not been for the Romans road, for Jesus and the disciples, the gospel wouldn't have advanced to us to this day. We are the benefactors of the ingenuity of the Roman road infrastructure and system that allowed that gospel and that mission that Jesus gave to go to the uttermost places. The way they got there was by way of the Roman road. And I think when we take to heart that mandate and begin now, here we are on a Tuesday night at 9 o'clock at our various locations. But now, because of the use of technology, this conversation can go to the masses. Now, when you begin to think about how you can implement that and use that for the advancement of good, man, the possibilities are endless. And I think leaders and pastors, need to be having these conversations now about what kind of platforms, what financial investments we need to make, what personnel investments we need to make, what training we need to get up to speed. So if our church right now is just having phone calls as our way of worship, then we need to be developing strategic plans now in terms of what do we need to do in some first step ways to get cameras and the things that we need necessary in our church that will allow us to have the capabilities to stream and to do some of these other things. And I think we need, if you don't have that expertise in-house, then you definitely need to be making the investments and consulting with persons to get yourself up to speed, because it is the new way.
I just received my the latest copy of the Harvard Business Review. And this month's the November-December edition has the cover article is the Work from Anywhere Future.
Yeah.
Work from Anywhere Future, lessons from organizations that have made the transition and flourished. And so the business world anticipates that people will be able to work remotely from just about anywhere. And generally, the people who have thrived in the midst of the pandemic are those who have been able to work from home, or to work from a park bench, or work from their car, or work from their garage. They don't have to be in California or someplace to work. And so technology is changing the way the world works.
Yeah.
And so when we think about the ministry, we think about the church, you're right. Churches, leaders have to think about making those investments in equipment, personnel, training, and then all of the resources that are going to be necessary to continue to thrive into the 21st century.
Right.
Going forward, we don't know what's going to be the place of technology. But we do know that through technology, the world is going to continue to advance, and the church has to continue to be on the cutting edge of that. I have just a couple of more questions, and one of them. Let me look at my look at my notes here for a minute, because one of them really deals, and this is a further explanation of this. What is the place of quality in going forward?
Yeah. Again, I say all the time, anytime we go through drive-throughs, we see the Chick-fil-A philosophy when it comes to quality. It's very few other places that I don't even like to go to anymore. Not when I don't even try to eat out fast food much anymore now. But you can't take away from the level of excellence when it comes to customer service and quality that you see in Chick-fil-A. What was interesting, Doc, even over the course of the pandemic, when many places were closed and businesses shut down, and many of them trying to migrate to social distances and everything, every Chick-fil-A I went through, the lines were still
long,
wrapped around the buildings and long in the midst of the pandemic. And it says a lot about the excellence and the quality that they strive to provide in their fast food chain. I think when we understand that we have been given this privilege of ministry, and we have a God who does all things well, it necessitates that we do everything with excellence and a spirit of excellence. And so our presentations, I know you and we try to preach with a high level of quality in terms of our sermonic presentations. And I think that has to trickle down, in every facet of our ministries, all the way down to the cleanliness of our bathrooms, to the manicured, premises of and the cleanliness, whether you're in the hood or storefront, wherever you are, in terms of operating with that high sense of excellence and quality in what we present. And so that's why when we understand that now on these digital platforms, the quality of our presentations is at stake. People are driving by a lot of different ministries on Wednesday nights and Sunday mornings on Facebook and YouTube. And so if you don't have a quality presentation, it could lead to people not opening up the door of that virtual church and coming in to take a closer look, because there's a lot of competition. And so you have to have all of that in mind in terms of the quality of how you are presenting your services, and the quality, because we're appealing to a different type of stimulus virtually, in terms of the ear, the eye, all of those help to create that experience. And so we have to keep that. Are we coming through in HD? Is it great quality? How is the sound? How is the speed? Do we need to upgrade our Wi-Fi? Is the broadcast timing out every 2 to 3 minutes? All of that affects the quality of our presentations. And we have to become very adamant about making sure we are giving God our best and presenting God in the best way that we possibly can.
Yeah, I agree. I think that quality is, there's no substitute for quality. You may have great quantity, but if the quality is poor, if I used to say to our sound people that the people come to the church on Sunday to hear me preach. The choir is ancillary. Everything else is ancillary to people coming to hear the pastor preach. They come to hear the gospel. But if the sound is bad, if the quality is bad, and they can't hear, then they're not going to come back. And so quality is everything.
Yeah.
Quality is, you see it, you feel it, you taste it, you smell it the moment you enter into the facility. And so in many ways, the church has an opportunity now to really kind of improve on the quality of its building experience.
Yeah.
When people come back to Second Calvary, I want them to notice the differences in the restrooms and in the building and in every way. I want them to
Yeah.
see the difference.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the midst of renovating our sanctuary right now as
Mhm.
we speak for that
Yeah,
for that purpose right there. But
yeah.
here's something I think that's exciting, Doc, and regardless, and I hope some pastor is listening tonight really hears this. Regardless of the size of your ministry right now,
Yeah,
we're all on the same playing field right now.
right.
What people view virtually, they don't know the size of Second Cavalry by what they see on the TV or virtually. They don't know size. So where a lot of this in past were maybe prohibitors for some churches that had good quality ministry, but you're competing with other larger churches in your city that got better facilities and this and that. Now you have an opportunity to allow people to experience, hear your preaching, hear the quality of your ministry, and it becomes an opportunity because people are shopping in this time and in this season, and you're now getting exposure on the airways that you may not have ever gotten the opportunity for people to drive and come to your side of town because maybe your location wasn't as attractive as others. But now you have an opportunity to expose people to your ministry, to the uniqueness of what you offer in the kingdom. And I think you have to take full advantage of that. And so, making sure you are creating a high quality presentation can now begin to attract people to your ministry, to your church as we come out of this, that can now draw people to you that may not would have readily been drawn to you initially.
You're right. Because and I've said this, and I still hold to this. That we are going to need to continue with the virtual ministry platforms, the use of technology, and even become even more sophisticated with how we use technology. So quality is everything. I mean, it is everything. It sets us apart. And you're right. When it comes to something that is well done, the size of the church is inconsequential, because what people want is a meaningful spiritual engagement with the Savior. They want to know that they can grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. They want to know that that by my sitting in this class or this learning session or on this virtual platform, that at the end of the day, my life is going to be so much richer and stronger. We have just a few more minutes. I do want to ask you one more question, and put this before you, and I'll ask. This is. I'll see if I can answer this as well. What would you recommend to pastors going forward? I mean, we've had 10 months of this. What's your number one recommendation to a pastor?
My number one recommendation is pastors need to begin to psychologically prepare themselves for what I'm calling the 60-40 reality going forward. That 60% of what we would do will be virtually and 40% in person. And so we have to begin to psychologically prepare ourselves for that and to begin to prepare our ministries for that. So if I understand that 60% of what I do is going to be virtually and 60% of my worshipers are going to be virtually, then even when I return to church, where before the pandemic, our mindset, and I think a lot of churches' mindset was people that watched us and viewed us through our streams, they watched us have church.
Mhm.
We didn't really engage that audience. We really not at the level we do now. Now we have virtual greeters, and we have people commenting and all throughout the chats during the services, and all of this engagement that we have. We didn't have that before. We just had the services online, and people viewed us online, and we just said to them basically, "Watch us have church." But now going forward, you're going to have to every week engage these virtual audiences, because that's where, and I think you said this last week at another gathering, that's where the people are. And so we have to preach and plan to that end, because a lot of what we're going to be doing forward, people are not going to come back in the droves to midweek Bible studies in person when, man, they've been sitting in a Zoom class and the luxury of their home and can go straight home from work and all of these kinds of things, and not have to fight traffic or all of the things that become inconveniences for and deterrents for people coming to Bible study, taking opportunities to grow. Now they are engaged in these Zoom classes on these online platforms, or maybe can even get it on demand at their own leisure. This is where we're going to have to really put our investments and going forward, if we're going to have successful ministries, and we're going to have to start counting different things in terms of measuring the quality of our ministries.
Well, if I were answering that question, I would agree wholeheartedly with everything that you're saying, in terms of offering advice to pastors. I think what I would add to that is I would say to pastors, become a student.
Oh yeah.
Become a student of the ministry of change, of organizational development, organizational design. Become a student so that you can then begin to structure a ministry that's going to be relevant going forward. Last question, last thought, and I three things that I've learned this year, that I've seen to be so significant. Three things, and I'll lead off because I've been asking you all of these questions. You'll have an opportunity to maybe feed off of mine. But there are three things that I think that I've learned this year that I'm going to carry over and give some real thought to going forward. The first is leading. I've learned the value of leading, and something that you said earlier about leaning in, but leading forward. I've seen the value of my being the leader and then leading the congregation. The second thing that I've learned, that I'll take away from this year, is that there is no substitute for planning. There's no substitute for planning. Planning and execution are critical when you're in the midst of a crisis. And then the last thing that I've learned is that there's value in consistency. Be consistent from week to week, day to day, in the things that you're doing, and in the things that you're trying to get the congregation to do. One of the things that they suggest in one of the articles that I read in this Harvard Business Review is to reduce the number of things that you're doing. You know, in the midst of this crisis, you know, the organizations need to kind of pare down some of the things that you're doing, so that you have enough energy to engage fully in this one thing that is most central to who you are. So these three things I've learned this year that are critical to organizational resiliency, organizational effectiveness, is that you know, I've got to lead. I've got to lead this thing, and the pastor has got to lead. That there's got to be planning and execution. You know, you have to plan, because a plan is better than no plan. It's too late to make a plan when you need a plan. And what has happened is that some people have found themselves we've all found ourselves in the midst of this crisis, but we had no plan.
Right.
Or we didn't eventually come up with a plan. And so planning and execution, and then consistency. I've learned the importance of consistency. You know, I go to work every day. I go to my office every day. And that is to create consistency in the organization, so that people see that I'm there, that I'm, you know, so there's consistency in things. So those are three of the things that I've learned this year that are really critical.
Yeah, that's good. Wow.
Going forward.
Yeah, that's good. Now, and it's interesting in terms of, likewise, when I kind of step back and look at some of the things that I've, you know, kind of learned, I knew early on in terms of, I would echo and ditto what you said in terms of leading. My thing was during the course of this, and I remember having a conference call with my leaders, like during that first and second week, and told all of our leaders, this is not the time for us to go dark. We can't go dark now as leaders. The people need to hear from us. They need to know that we're here and we're going to be here. I didn't say have all of the answers, but we couldn't go dark. And so I think being able to lead in the midst of all of this is something that I have learned and learning, and also learning anew in terms of what it means to be a leader of a congregation and of a people. The other thing I think for me is communication. It is communication. Again, not necessarily having all of the answers, but bringing clarity in terms of in the midst of uncertainty, and often in the midst of chaos, being able to communicate what your next steps are, what you're working on, what you're where you're planning, where things are going, what you've accomplished, being able to communicate. And I think that's something I've learned the importance of. And even in this season, sometimes over communicating things, just for the point and the safety of making sure you are properly communicating, with people. So leadership, communication, and simplicity. I think it was a book that I picked up off of my shelf. I had read some time ago. I think it might have been by Tom Rainer. I think it was The Simple Church. But when I really look at the things we're doing now, it is really simplifying our mission and our vision and the things that we do. Sometimes I think we have created these very complex churches,
organizations, and organizations, and all of this, and all this that is just so complex. Yeah, that's very good.
You tired, the people tired, everybody tired,
Mhm.
because we ran them out with all of this stuff. But I think really what's been refreshing in this season is the stuff that we're really doing. I mean,
Mhm.
praying, missions and outreach, preaching, discipleship, just
Mhm.
those basic things, what I call blocking and tackling.
Mhm.
Basic blocking and tackling is really winning in this season. And I think
Mhm.
um man, it's been refreshing to recommit and to re-engage in those
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
And those are the driving forces of our churches right now.
Mhm. Yeah, I have really been strengthened, and I appreciate your comments about communication and clarity and simplicity. Those are, and I guess, and I would just say this to any pastor or church leader who's listening to this conversation tonight. Hear those words and take those words in. Um, there's no substitute for communicating to your members what it is that you're going to do. There's no substitute for leading the congregation. An old preacher told me something once. He says, either you're going to run it or they're going to run it. Somebody going to run it. It ain't going to run itself. Somebody has to run it. And
Mhm.
in a situation like this, people are looking for the pastor to communicate where we're going
Yeah.
and what it is that we're doing.
Well,
Hey, Dr. Nelson, we've reached this 1 hour time limit, and my goodness, I didn't know whether or not we were going to be able to pull it off without
without the bishop.
to take up a third of our time, but it's been a joy,
It
and
is.
we hope to be back on the 13th of January, the second Tuesday in January. And we hope that you'll join us in many ways. We hope that you have been blessed by these conversations that we've had with the Pastors Forum. We'll be here on Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock. And we hope that you'll join us as well. If there's anything you'd like for us to talk about, you can hit me up at info@secondcalvary.org, or Pastor Nelson, if you'll give them your email address. Um,
info@abyssiniachurch.org.
yeah, yeah, info at
Or
secondcalvary.org.
yep, or they can just drop it in the comments tonight.
Yeah, 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 and we'll get those. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your comments, and we hope in some way that we've been able to help you and bless you. God bless you,
God
and
bless you.
have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we'll talk to you then. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.